The workplace is where adults spend most of their lives. 5 out of 7 days, you go to work. You get up in the morning, brush your teeth, listen to bad news programs, and get ready to go to work. Then you work for 8 hours, except, of course, if you listen to KPFK, of course. Then you work 8 hours. Then you go home and you recoup so that you can do that again the next day. This is where you spend your life. If you gave a damn about democracy, that would be the first institution in which you would install it. But we live in a society that has exempted the workplace from that. Wow. What does it mean that a society goes to war in Iraq and Afghanistan to bring democracy? What are you talking about? What idea is this? You want to bring them the benefits of working in an institution where they have absolutely no participation in reaching all of the basic decisions upon which their lives depend. You're not bringing them democracy. You're bringing the American capitalist system. It's not democratic, and it never was. And we're going to come back at the end and see what that means. But keep all this in your mind as we now turn and look at the rise and the decline of capitalism.
I'm Dan Nowman Niswander. Great speakers open their hearts and open their minds before they open their mouths. Richard Wolff is an economist. He's a visiting professor in the graduate program in international affairs at the New School University in New York City. He's also professor emeritus at the University of Massachusetts in Amherst. He's the author of books such as Democracy at Work, A Cure for Capitalism. He has a regular column in truthout.org, and he's the host of the radio show Economic Update. He spoke at the Musicians Union in Hollywood on the subject of economic crisis and system decline and what we can do. Ladies and gentlemen, scholars and students, Professor Richard Wolff.
Capitalism is a system that's about 250 years old in terms of being dominant. Most of the history of the human race, people have lived in a non-capitalist system. That is, they did not have corporations, they did not have boards of directors, they didn't have shares and shareholders, none of that. We did real well in the human race for most of our history without any of those institutions. Then in the 18th century, more or less, in a place we now call Great Britain, capitalism emerged, this new arrangement of how to organize production with employers and employees and wage labor and commodity production and all of that. And it spread from Great Britain to Western Europe, to North America, to Japan, and a few other places. And then finally to the rest of the world. But I want to talk about the first 250 years, from the start in Britain until the 1970s. Oh boy, the 1970s are going to loom very large in my story today. But for those first 250 years, as capitalism spread, something very peculiar was the way capitalist enterprises made their decisions. Generation after generation of boards of directors and major shareholders made a very peculiar set of decisions. Here's what the decision was. We're going to build our industries, we're going to grow our industries, but we're going to grow them right here in our own little country. So the British grew them in London and Liverpool and Bristol and those places. And the French grew them in Lyon and Lille, and the Germans in Dusseldorf and Berlin, and so on. And the industries grew because they were capitalism worked. The boards of directors got the surplus, and they used it to build the companies. And as they built the companies, they needed, of course, more raw materials. They needed to bring food in from the countryside to feed all the workers that were gathering in these industrial centers. And they needed people to leave the countryside to come in and work in these exploding capitalist economies. And at first, the British, the French, the Germans, and so on, drew the food, the raw materials, and the people from the immediately surrounding countryside. They called that the hinterland. But because capitalism was successful in Western Europe, North America, and Japan, it quickly, in a matter of a few decades, outgrew the available resources of raw materials, food, and people. But capitalism is a driving system where making more money and growing the business is how you survive. So when they ran out of enough food, raw materials, and people in their own countries, they made a decision. Why are we stopping at our border? Let's make the whole world a place that can deliver to us food, raw materials, and people as we need them. And so they did. We call that colonialism or imperialism, where the capitalist centers moved around and reorganized the world to serve the driving demands of a successful, growing capitalism. And millions of people came off the countrysides of North America, Western Europe, Japan, and so on, and crowded into the cities. If you want to get a feeling for that, go to the edges of any of the cities that are now experiencing today what happened back 2 centuries ago. Go to the outskirts of Sao Paulo in Brazil, or Lagos, Nigeria, or 1,000 other industrializing cities in the third world. They're going through the same thing. And the conditions were, as they are now in those areas, horrible. No housing, no sanitation, no roads, terrible conditions. And in Western Europe, North America, and Japan, where all of this was happening in the 18th, 19th, and into the early 20th century, slowly, the working people began to look around and realize how bad they had it. However poor they were on the land, they could farm and eat. In the city, they couldn't. They could breathe in the country. In the city, they stopped wanting to. It was very bad. And slowly there emerged the organizations, the unions, the socialist parties, the communist parties, all of that, demanding a better deal. This put the capitalists in a bit of a squeeze. What were they going to do? They had to keep the people coming. They had to keep the food and the raw material. Otherwise, they couldn't grow, and then they couldn't survive. So, and this is crucial for those of you that consider yourselves on the left side of the spectrum, which I'm sure is roughly 50% here. A deal was cut. The capitalists took the lesser of two evils for them. They agreed, okay, we're making a fortune. We're getting the surplus out of each and every one of you. But we're fearful of where your anger is taking you. We saw where your anger took you with the last economic system before capitalism, feudalism. We noticed that you separated Marie Antoinette from her own head. And we're not too eager to end up like that. So here's what we'll do. We don't want to. We'll try to destroy your organizations. We'll fight you tooth and nail. But our fallback position is if we can't repress you, we'll let your wages go up. We'll give you a rising standard of living. And we can afford it, because what we're doing in Asia, Africa, Latin America, as we destroy their economies to reconfigure them as places that deliver food, raw materials, and people to us here in Western Europe, North America, and Japan, Their wages are going down, their living standards are collapsing, their whole societies are dissolving. And we're making a huge amount of money, so we can part with a portion of it and raise your wages. For the last 2 centuries, up until 1970, then, what we had was a growing inequality in the world. At the top stood the employers. They were the winners of this game. It is, after all, their system. They did real well. Below them, the working classes of Western Europe, North America, and Japan. Didn't do anywhere near as well as those capitalists, but they had a rising standard of living. And then the mass of the poor of the third world, who had a declining standard of living. And so it went. And so the world capitalist system grew this way. And then the 1970s changed everything. What happened in the 1970s? Well, many things. But I'm going to focus on 2 because they help me tell the story. First, jet air travel. It became possible for every capitalist anywhere in the world to get to any other corner of the world in a matter of hours. And then telecommunications, the internet, and all of that, which made it possible for a capitalist in Cincinnati to be able to monitor and observe and measure what a factory in Shanghai was doing as easily as it used to be possible to measure what was happening in a factory across the street. The capitalists had developed jet technology. The capitalists had developed, with much government help, but they had developed the internet. And now they saw a spectacular possibility. We have a chance, they said. Here for 150 years, we've been raising the wages of the workers in North America, Western Europe, and Japan because we had to. We had to cut that deal. That's what made our capitalism successful, prevented those workers from undoing it. And meanwhile, we've created this enormous mass of people in Russia, China, India, Brazil, all those places, who are living on next to nothing. But the engine of jets and the internet allow us a fantastic opportunity. We are going to leave Western Europe, North America, and Japan, where we have to pay high wages, and move production to Asia, Africa, and Latin America, where we have low wages. We're going to finally defeat the working classes of Western Europe, North America, and Japan. How are we going to do it? We're going to abandon them. We're leaving. To Western Europe, North America, and Japan, capitalism is saying, have a really nice day. We are out of here. We're gone. We created the conditions that allow us to undo 200 years of history. We're going to make a fortune by moving the factories from Western Europe, North America, and Japan to Brazil, China, and India. We're going to start in the 60s and 70s by moving manufacturing. In my classes at the university, at this point in my lectures, I would often stop and say, we're going to have an interesting experiment that I'm sure many of you are going to find really exciting. Remember, I'm talking to young people aged 17 to 22. I said, here's one by one, each of you is going to come to the front of the room here, come up to the podium. You're going to remove all of your clothing. See, you're younger than you thought. Over on this side, you're going to put all the clothing that was made in America, has a little label in the back. And over here, all the clothing that was made someplace else. And you're going to learn the lesson that the pile of not here is very big, and the pile of made in America is virtually invisible. Now, I won't do that exercise here, although clearly there are many of you who would enjoy it. So first it was manufacturing, clothing, machinery, and so on. Over the last 10 years and 20 years, it's included services. Blueprints are no longer made by people here for architects. They're made over there. Lawyers in this country can't find any work because lots of the drudgery work of law is now being done by lawyers in other countries. I recently had a friend who broke a leg skiing, and when turning to his insurance company, was sent an air ticket. And it was explained to him he's to go to an airport near where he had the accident, get on an airplane, and fly to India, where he will be met by an ambulance that will take him to a hospital, that will do the surgery and so on to fix his leg. The doctor in question has an MD degree from Johns Hopkins University in Baltimore, where he studied right next to the doctor with the same degree who would have done the job here in the United States. The difference is the doctor here charges $47,000 for that operation, and the doctor in India $4,700, which is a difference you might notice. And the insurance company made it very clear. You don't have to do this, but if you don't, we don't cover this. You want us to cover the cost? Have a nice trip. Okay? We are outsourcing, exporting jobs, whatever you call it. We're just at the beginning of that process. We're not at the middle, we're not at the end, we're at the beginning. In Dhaka, Bangladesh, as I'm sure many of you know, a few weeks ago, a building collapsed, housing many workshops, producing clothing. Fire and collapse of the building. Over 1,000 people died in that process. That led then, among other things, to a demonstration down the streets of Dhaka. About 300,000 labor union and union supporters demanding a higher minimum wage. Just imagine, people in other countries demand higher minimum wages. And their demand was for a high minimum wage of $100 per month, because the current minimum wage in Bangladesh is $38 per month. How are you going to compete with that? Imagine the capitalist picking up the morning newspaper, knowing what he pays in Cincinnati or Youngstown, Ohio, where I was born, or here in California, whatever it is you pay your workers, and you compare that with $38 a month? My goodness. And so capitalists left the United States, and they're leaving more and more. Who's leaving? The board of directors. They're the ones who make that decision. And they make it because it's more profitable to do that. And we all live with the results. That's how this system works. And let's see what the effects are. Many of you are interested in ecology. Let's see. If we produce goods here, then we have, in the United States, then we have to transport them to the market here in the United States. But if we stop producing them here and produce them in China, then we get to ship them all the way back. All that crap dumped in the ocean, all that energy used to convey all those materials back. That's where pollution and ecological destruction come from. They come from the profit-making decisions of capitalist employers. I'm not against your separating the cans from the paper, from the glue. But what we do as individuals, what are we doing? We're not dealing with the fundamental shapers of how the world economy is evolving. Capitalists moved to China. So whatever it is you're wearing had to travel 10,000 miles of energy-using, water-polluting transport. That's crazy. But you live in it. You live in it. Let's see what else the effects of this were. I'm going to pick one American city because it's dramatic, but I could pick 1,000. Detroit is the city I'll pick. Very quick history of Detroit. 40 years ago, it was the center of successful American capitalism, the home of the automobile industry, the home of the strongest trade union in the United States at the time, the United Auto Workers, that was able to win good jobs and good income. It gave opportunities to the migration of African Americans from the American South to get a really good job, a secure job, to actually begin to participate in an American dream they had never imagined they could touch. So successful was this capitalism, it generated a whole new culture, a new music, Motown, that shaped the world. Really, an amazingly powerful, successful example of capitalist growth. 1960 had nearly 2 million people was the population. Now let's see. Fast forward 4 decades, today. Population of Detroit, 700,000. 1.3 million people driven out of their homes. No job, no work, no security, no place to live. Ripped the children out of their schools, the families out of their kinship networks. Many of them went to other cities where the same thing was done to them again. Go to Cleveland, go to Camden, New Jersey, go to my hometown, Youngstown. There you see how it works. The capitalist company leaves to make more money. GM, Ford, Chrysler. They made more money. They leave behind social catastrophe. Today, one of the urgent problems of Detroit, and by the way, I couldn't make this up, so you can all check it, but hear me out. One of the big problems in Detroit today, wild dogs. I'm not kidding. 50,000 is the estimate. 50,000 wild dogs roam the streets of Detroit. Why? The city laid off all the animal control officers, and the departing families couldn't afford to take the dog with them. So they left the dog. Half the houses of Detroit sit empty. So the dogs all found a place to live, where the dogs did something that, of course, I wouldn't discuss, and that produced many more dogs. And there's no one to contain them, and there's no one to feed them. They have to forage for themselves, and they now attack children, and it's a serious problem. Capitalism in 40 years, from a cultural, political model of what capitalism can do, to a wasteland besieged by wild dogs. Detroit is our future. That's what it is. Detroit is capitalism. Leave for the profits. The disaster is our collective problem. But here now the political implications. For most of the history of the United States, capitalism could turn to its own working class, i.e. you, me, and say, okay, we do rip you off. We do make profit off your labor. We do exclude you from all the decisions in the system that matter. But we raise your wages. You improve your living standard. You can go to the mall. But we have changed since the 1970s, so the deal we offer to you is slightly different. We plan to rip you off, snatch the surplus, exclude you from all the decisions, and deliver to you a declining standard of living. Will the American working class find that deal acceptable? And will they find the system that is offering them that deal acceptable? And if not, then maybe the significance of 550 people in this room is much bigger than we might have thought. Because our job is not so hard, because this is a system that has made a fundamental decision. It's leaving the areas of its own history. It's leaving North America, Western Europe, and Japan. And the signs of this are everywhere. This is the first generation of young people who face the following situation. If you're desperate for a job, you better get an education. But to get an education, you better pay more than ever before. And the way you're going to do that is to borrow more than ever before. So when you're finished with an education, you can have 10, 20, 40, 60, 80, $100,000 of debts, and then discover either that you can't get a job or that the job you can get will never get you out of debt. What a wonderful gift for a successful capitalism to give to its young generation. What kind of a society would do such a thing? You're shooting yourself in the foot. You're wrecking your young people. You're turning many of them away from education, which every economist will tell you is the future of any economy in the world. Why would a society be so irrational? Because for capitalists, this is no longer the place that matters. This is the place that mattered in the past. I have been at meetings where university officials go to try to convince corporations to endow a chair to give money to the university. And I've sat there and watched the big corporate officials explain to the academic deans and provosts in the room, I'd love to give you a chair, but I allocated already this year's chairs. Oh, really? Where? Let's see, Hyderabad, Rio, and Tianjin. Well, why would an American corporation? Because that's where the engineers are that they want, because those are where the engineers are coming that are cheap. They don't want to endow a chair here. They don't need anything here. Or to put it differently, they don't need an engineer. They need a fitness instructor. They need a fast food worker. They need a cleaner-upper. They don't need to spend money here. Why? They don't want an engineer from here. They want cheap labor. And Americans are not cheap enough yet.
I hope you enjoyed part 2 with Professor Richard Wolff on the subject of economic crisis and system decline. This is Dan Nowman Niswander. We'll see you next time